I'm Dan Weltin. I'm the editor-in-chief of our facility market, the brands that put on the NFM&T trade show. And I'm talking with Andy Gager about making better managers. So if you were in our keynote presentation, you heard Andy speak on some of this, and he'll elaborate on his points and answer any questions you may have. I guess, Andy, I'd like to start. You told the story where you were pulled in on a Friday, made a manager. Is there anything you wish you had at that point or were told at that point, training you received to become a better manager right from the start?
Yeah, well, yes, there is. There's this thing called process mapping, and it clearly defines exactly, the different tasks within the process that you should be doing. Clearly defines what do you do when you get into that task. And then supplemented with that is a thing called a RACI chart. A RACI chart being who's responsible for that task, who's accountable for that task, who supports that process, and who needs to be kept in the loop or informed. And I do fully support doing that because it removed the gray matter of people saying that's not my job. And it's black and white. There is no gray area. So if there's an R under your job title, you're going to be responsible to, execute that task. And I didn't know about this when I first became a supervisor. The other thing was, I too made the mistake of trying to be friends with everybody because, Friday afternoon I was a coworker. Now Monday morning I was now their boss. And that's very difficult to put somebody in that position without the proper training. So hence, that's why I developed the supervision and leadership training, is to better prepare these individuals to face some of these issues that I face. How to motivate employees, how to delegate job tasks, because again, in our head, nobody can do the job as well as we can, but there's only one of us. And everything needs to get done, so we do need to learn how to properly and consistently, delegate work.
What are some of the skills you think that people who have been promoted to manager, supervisor, don't have? They're good on the floor, but they've never been in charge of people before. What is missing in their bag of skills?
Well, one of the things that I believe is missing in the arsenal, or their supervisor tool belt maybe, is how do we properly communicate, now with our subordinates? Because, and this is one of the things I say is you have to understand your new role as the supervisor or manager of the department. You also your team needs to also now understand that you are now their supervisor or their manager. And so now the way we communicate with those individuals is now going to be slightly different, versus the way we used to talk to them. One of the other things is, this is a hard one too. We can't be friends anymore. We can be friendly, but we can't really be friends any longer, because if we're friends, whether we're cognizant of it or not, we're going to treat you differently than perhaps some of the individuals on our team that we don't necessarily care for or believe they have the right skill. So we could be friendly, we just can't really be, hang out and be friends.
Yeah, could you elaborate a bit on that? Like, where's the distinction, the fine line between being friendly and being your friend?
Well, when we're talking about being friends, we're probably not going to go out to lunch together, or I'm going to have them sitting in my office, all the time, talking about in front of other people about what we did together over the weekend, things like this. So there is definitely a fine line, okay, but we just can't broadcast that I'm very close friends, with some of the folks in our department.
You spent a lot of time this morning in your presentation talking about, developing trust. How and trust as a motivator. So how can a manager build trust with their team?
Well, as we talked about in the session this morning, building trust is vitally important. Treating people equally, getting that face time, communicating with every single person in our department, face to face, getting that time with them. I mentioned this morning doing Gemba walks, walking around, getting that face time in front of them. The other thing I mentioned this morning, that supervisors, on average spend less than 5%, actively supervising their team, which is wrong on so many different levels. But building that trust is really understanding what motivates that individual, and you're going to learn that or understand what motivates that individual once you get to, understand who they are, a little bit about, what they do, right, and how we can help them. And the most important thing is that they understand or they believe that you have their back.
We talk a lot about training. Okay, they don't have these skills. We need to train them. Is training always successful?
No. Yeah. Too many organizations believe that just because you sit through a 1-hour training session, you're now a subject matter expert or you're fully trained on that. One of the things we spoke about this morning was it's not enough just to train you, right, and show you a couple slides or PowerPoint slides or things like that. It's vitally important that we understand this is what needs to be done or this is what you're being trained on, and then you need to prove, or we need to prove, that you're now competent in whatever that training that you attended. So again, it's not enough just to train you. You need to prove to me that we have a transfer of knowledge. So I'm setting you up for success rather than setting you up for failure.
You've broken out employees by a superstar, a soldier, a rookie, or underperformer.
Yeah.
Of those, who makes the best manager? Obviously, you would think a superstar, but as you said today, they may be a superstar in one area, but not as a manager. So is there a particular group that you look to identify the future leaders?
I do look for that. I would look. So this morning I was talking about, every organization is in the world, they're set up as a 20, 40, 30, and 10. That, as you said, the 20%ers are my superstars. The 40%ers are my soldiers. They're dependable. They're reliable. I have 30% that might be new to the organization, right, or new to the role, and then I got the 10% group, right. I focus on my 40%ers. To see if I can work with one of those individuals at that level, because they tend to be the better supervisors and managers at that level versus, the superstars tend to be the ones that are more comfortable in firefighting. That's their comfort zone. They like functioning in that environment. They like being the hero because we pat them on the back and say, good job, when they swoop in and get the equipment up running. So they tend to function, their comfort zone tends to be more in firefighting. The 40%ers, right, the soldiers, they understand it. They tend to follow the rules. They tend to follow the processes. They tend to be more prone to follow, company policies, whereas the 20%ers tend to be the mavericks, if you will, of the group. 30%ers just don't know enough, right, to get to that point. The 10%ers, they won't follow anything. They'll go to their own beat of their own drum.
So in that group, as you're looking to, cultivate the next leader, what are you looking for? What are the attributes that you would pick out as someone who could be a good leader? Well, you said the key word there. Who is a leader? Who is the influencer? So does that individual have the ability to influence other people, right, to be a good leader, to look for those continuous improvements, to understand, on a personal level how to motivate their team. They need to be a good communicator. They also need, it's interesting, they also need to be a good coach. They also need to be a good teacher. They also need to be a good consultant. So supervisors wear many, many different hats, and they have many, many different roles. So, with the 30%ers, let me go back to that. 30%ers, you're not going to really be a consultant at that point. You're going to be more of a coach,
and a trainer with that group. The 20 percenters, to be honest, they could probably do your job. So you're not going to supervise that group. You're probably going to be more of a consultant, right? They'll come to you to say, what's your opinion? Or you go to them and ask them their opinion. So at that point, you're a consultant. So are you a coach? Are you a teacher? Are you a consultant? And are you a supervisor? So that the 10% group, I'm probably going to be more of a hands-on, heavy-handed supervisor for that 10%er, because I need to do something complete. The way I manage a 10%er is completely different than the way I deal with my 30, my 40, or my 20%ers.
Is it ever worth keeping a 10%er, or should you always be looking to exit plan them?
My philosophy is we need to move on from the 10%er, because as supervisors and managers, again, we tend to spend 80 or 90% of our time with that group, thinking that we can convert them to to elevate them to a 40% group. And the reality is they'll never get to that. They'll never get to that level. So, the old adage of document, because at some point we just need to cut that umbilical cord and just say enough's enough. All right, I need to move that person out, because, as I mentioned this morning, those 10%ers a lot of times tend to be the negative influencers, which just brings the rest of the department down, right? That I'm the only one who does any work. I'm not sure what my coworkers do. My company's not paying me enough money, right? I work too many hours. I mean, every fiber in their body is negative, and that just brings the rest of the group down. That just brings the rest of the team down. So as a good supervisor or manager, we need to recognize that and then take the appropriate disciplinary action to move that person out of the group, or out of the company, to be honest.
Do you think for management it's always best to promote from within, or are there circumstances where you should look outside the organization to find the next manager?
Okay. I guess my answer to that would be, initially I would look internally to see who could be that next superstar manager or leader, and do we have that person with that skill set to make that move or that jump to being a supervisor or manager. If we identify that that person is not there, we may choose to look outside the organization. But also keep in mind that one of the reasons why we would be looking outside the organization is because there's a unique set of skills that person would bring to our organization that we currently are lacking, or they may have worked for another company where they had made some major improvements with their company, and we want to replicate that improvement within our own organization as well. Now the challenge with that is that, look, every new leader, again, in my personal experience, they want to leave their own legacy. So, they like I've witnessed this, some outside resources will come in, managers or leaders, and just say, look, this is all messed up. We need to just change everything in here, because this is the way I did it at my other company. Well, believe it or not, there's actually some things that we're actually doing pretty well in our company. And what I say is, if that process is actually delivering your expectations and it's consistently delivering, those expectations, I would consider that perhaps a best practice. And so why change it? We may tweak it a little bit, but if it's delivering what we want it to do, why change it? Too often I've seen other managers come in and say, that's not the way we did it in my other company. This is the way we're going to do it. So now we're going to do a global change of the way I'm used to doing things. And that's a tough sell. That's a tough sell.
Lastly here, I want to bring it back to what a story you shared in your general session this morning, and kind of do you have any advice for managers who were in the same shoes as you, where immediately you were told to terminate an employee, they reacted pretty strongly to it? How did you handle that situation? Did it just blow over, or did you have to do something, and kind of what advice would you give a new manager in a similar situation?
Well, again, as I just said a moment ago, document, right? So whatever the company policy is, typically that would be, an informal, verbal warning, maybe a second verbal warning, and then we start progressing through the disciplinary process, right? Here's your first written, second written, right? Maybe a suspension, maybe a PIP program. But, back to the story that I was mentioning this morning, when I first became, a manager, they told me I had to terminate what was, a couple days prior to that, a coworker. And that's a very, very difficult situation to put anybody in. So my recommendation on that would be, look, before you do something like that, understand that we clearly have the documentation that justifies the termination, and absolutely 100%, you have to have other individuals like the human resource manager or somebody else in the room with you when you do terminate. I made the mistake of terminating that individual without somebody else in the room, and that individual threatened me. And I did not have a witness, and I was convinced that this person was going to do bodily harm to me. So make sure that you're covered. Make sure that human resources, is represented there, and you have a witness. The documentation is there, so it's cut and dry. Your performance did not meet our minimum standards. These are the reasons why you are being terminated.
Great. Thank you so much, Andy, for joining us again here at Show Central. We'll be having another conversation in about 10 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. Appreciate it.